All right. Well, we have lots of good questions, and my hope is that we'll work through most, if not all of these. But I am mindful that we have four experts from varied backgrounds, and you might have a question for one of your peers. I didn't prep you on this, and so I don't want y'all to miss the opportunity to ask each other something. Is there anything you're dying to know from each other from the presentations? Or otherwise, we can just jump right in.
I have one for Allison. Is this on? Yes, it is. I was wondering when I was sitting there as an obvious creature who has used ChatGPT before and GPT-4, did you have to in the prompts that you used, did you have to specify your faith, tradition, background, and the type of audience, disclose that, or you just use it like openly, whatever it gives me, this is it?
Yeah, interesting. I never did that. I was just using prompts based on Robinson's book. Um, I mean, he is always referring to the Bible. So I'm assuming there's an assumption there that this is a biblical Christian Bible faith. But no, I never said I'm a Protestant, I'm a Baptist, and I never, for this part of my project, never said this is my congregation to whom I'm speaking, because also Robinson's book doesn't consider context, doesn't consider the audience in that way, which is one of the shortfalls of his book. One thing that would be interesting to do, if I can keep expanding on this particular project, is to take some other different kinds of preaching textbooks which do engage with those kinds of things, and then try those with this same method to be able to compare and contrast the output from these different texts, right? One thing that's really fun about this is that I am not only assessing GPT-4, I'm also assessing our textbook and starting to learn what instructions in the book are too vague, what is it missing, what chapters don't work. Yeah, I was telling somebody I learned actually after writing this whole thing up that Haddon Robinson didn't even use his own chapter on outlining. That as soon as a better textbook came out, he ditched his own chapter. I was like, I spent so long wrestling with that, and he just left it to me as a piece of junk. But yeah, really, I didn't input it because it wasn't there. But that's a great question.
That's interesting. Well, let's jump in here. First question, we're going to try to move in kind of thematic pieces here as best we can. Should we think of AI as a tool, as in something in our toolbox, or is it better to think of it as a lens, something in which we would see the world?
This is a vote. I vote for two.
And why?
Okay, it's not. That was part of the question. No, I think the as a tool, because as a person who makes AI for a living, that's the intended purpose. It is not. It's not. It's not as a. Its purpose is not to be used as a way of seeing the world.
So I would say, yes, it's a tool, but I think we have to acknowledge that there's a lot of people for whom it will be a lens. And so, I mean, when we're talking about church life and so on, that'll have to be part of how we approach responding to that or ministering to people who see it as a lens rather than a tool. I think it's going to be formative in many ways, I would say.
And there is some theological reflection on that as well. And so Andrew Davison has a paper called Tools Are for the Workers, which is a reflection on scholastic theology in this, because of course, humans often do things with tools that they ought not to. So I would say normatively, it's a tool, and in practice, people will do things with tools that they ought not to do. And I would put it as strongly as that. But I completely acknowledge you're right, they will.
Yeah.
One way I think we benefit from thinking of AI as a tool is because our tools do shape the way we work, and they also affect us as human persons. Even if you think about the way you drive your car and how that shapes you, your body, the way you move through the world. The only resistance I would have to thinking of it as a tool is that maybe for you, Dr. Rivas, you can think of it as a tool because you understand it so well. But I think in general, for many people, it's hard to conceive of AI. I mean, I'm thinking about just generative AI as a tool because the way that they interact with it, there is so much mystery that then it becomes something else. It can take on the role of a figure. And so maybe tool language is useful for people who are studying it, but it may not be the natural mode of connection to AI that many people have.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't think that we can objectify it as easily as we think we can when we're so surrounded by it. There's no way it's not becoming formative to all of us. You know, you mentioned the car, which I find an interesting one. I have a new car. It knows who I am when I get in. It says, "Welcome, Anna, drive safely." It adjusts the seat to where I like it. There's all of these things that happen. Even the way I see the world with the heads-up display and all of that sort of thing changes the way that you interact with the world, and it has an impact on us. So I think even though it is a tool and it can be a lens, it's the formative impact, I think, is almost intangible.
I think the comparison with cars is really interesting, and a number of people have pointed out that we don't actually understand how cars work, or at least, I mean, I certainly don't. I'm not very technically minded in that sense, but we still use them as tools. I think one difference is the temptation to personify or anthropomorphize is so much greater. So as a practice, I will never use a chatbot or a large language model and address it as if it were a person. I instruct it as if it were a machine because I'm so conscious of that risk of anthropomorphization. So the ways that we use them will change how we perceive them, whether we perceive them as a lens or a tool. We have agency in that.
I don't disagree with that as an ethicist, but I have to say that if I were an old person and living on my own and nobody came to visit me, I'd be grateful for that interaction and pretending it was a human, I have to say. And it's a sad world if that's what we come to, but I think in many ways we do. If that reality then hastens that future, that's unfortunate. But I know for myself, I'm an extrovert, and if I'm left alone when I'm old, it's probably my greatest fear. If I'm left alone when I'm old, I'm talking with the thing, and it's going to have a name.
Wait, Dr. Robbins, this was a question, it reminded me of a question I had for you, which is, how do you think of this relationship that people can have with AI, maybe grief AI, or these different, or counseling AI, or a friend, a teen AI friend? How do you, what's different about those relationships to the relationships people have with their cat, or a teenager might have with a celebrity, or an imaginary friend?
I mean, I would say there's sometimes not a big difference if you talk about celebrity in terms of, I mean, Baudrillard talks about the separation of the image from the real. And so the relationship that somebody has with a celebrity is not really with the real thing anyway. It's not with the real person. It's with an image that has become detached from the thing. And so it's just as artificial as what is probably a relationship with an AI bot. It's artificial, except that the bot knows more about you potentially than the celebrity does, and so you're left with this disembodied image in both cases. One though that is able to actually call you by name and know some things about you and ask you questions about your life, which it impersonates humanity so well, I think sometimes, that I think that's creating issues for us socially in this time and place. And I mean, it's easy to say that's really bad, but if half of our kids, if not more than that, are having these online friends, that's a reality we have to address, surely, as pastors and people preparing pastors for leadership and so on, and just in society in general, I think.
That's good. For anyone else that cares about this issue, we have an organization called IEEE that creates standards like Wi-Fi and whatnot. And so we created a standard. I'm part of that. We created an standards for AI ethics that deals with the simulation of empathy, and is the standard piece 7014. and it's precisely to prevent it from crossing these boundaries, because we have technology that could simulate being human in the empathic side of it, but there are certain boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. If anyone's interested, it's IEEE 7014.
That's great. A couple of clarifying questions here, just in knowledge base. There in AI, there are large language models and reasoning models. Can you clarify a little bit of how these differ, both in technology and usefulness of output? Yeah, in AI, there's large language models and reasoning models. How do these differ in technology and in usefulness of output?
Well, I can take this one.
Okay.
It's your job. It's your job, Dr. Rivas.
Thank you. So language models again is the one that predicts the word, the next word in a sequence, or a token in a sequence. And so it's a language model. It does what you asked it to do, but a reasoning model is a kind of a mechanism that you put around a language model, and it could be another language model, and that is trying to prepare a rationale of what is going to be asked of the language model, or kind of prompting the language model to present a justification before, or a reasoning before it gives you an answer. It's a way of preconditioning the model. And it may also, it's a similar thing to what another mechanism called retrieval augmented generation, that again, language model is not a database. I didn't say this, but a language model is not a database, and it should not be trusted for retrieval of information. But there's this thing called retrieval augmented generation that can help with that. So if you put all these pieces together, like a retrieval augmented generation and a rational or a thinking module next to a language model, then you could do that. But still, at the core of it, it's a language model that is giving you additional things to compensate for its shortcomings. So that's the difference, I think, between the model that is thinking or trying to rationalize thoughts. Yeah, that's what I'm going with. So, sorry. And the output, output. Input is the same from your perspective, but the output is you can get the rationale behind the output that you get. That may or may not be useful to you, but you can get that if you want.
Very good. Very good. Thinking about the average person in the pew. They don't have the time or maybe even the interest to dig deep into this. We've done more today than many of us have done ever before. And so can you offer some resources, maybe 1 or 2 books, podcasts, something we should watch? What resources are out there for the average person to have a better understanding of this?
I think it really depends which aspect, though, because we're talking about an enormous field.
Sure.
So, I mean,
Pick one.
If I'm honest with you, I think some of the most important things are not addressed yet. And I'll give an example. I mean, we've talked about the reality that people will use, and a lot of the discourse is around what I'm looking for from a church or from a pastor. But as Christian ministers, part of what we're here for is to point out that people's desires are deeply misleading. And therefore, of course, it is a reality that people will use things that they ought not to want. But perhaps part of the Christian message, I'm not sure this will ever get a publication, part of the Christian message might be, even as you age and you find that you're lonely, that the spiritually formative thing to do will be to learn from that loneliness. Now, the thing is, I've seen nobody writing about this. The sense of needing to be sacrificial and to set aside to us. And so some of the things that I think are most important, I'm not seeing being addressed, if that makes sense.
Don't you think it's fair for an older person to expect that the church they've given themselves to for their whole lives should be there for them, and it's not? I mean, that's a valid I think that's I think that's valid. And so to say, well, suck it up, Buttercup, you're old now and you're lonely, that's the way it is, just seems like maybe why they're not going to church if that's what their pastor is saying to them.
I'm
I know
not
that-
saying
I
the
know
church
that's not
shouldn't
what
do
you're
it.
saying.
What I'm
Yeah.
talking about is the satisfaction of our own desires is a very poor guide as a Christian.
But we have very real desires. Is that not, I mean, our deepest desires are for God and they're God given, right? So we desire things like connection. We desire things that are good. All the things that we desire aren't bad, it seems to me. If we desire it, doesn't make it bad, surely.
No, but our desires are disordered as well. So our desires reflect desires for true goods, but the temptation is we replace those true goods with some artificial replica of them.
Oh,
And we ought to turn that down.
Yeah.
absolutely, if there's no alternative available. But what if that is the only
Even
thing
if
you've
there's no
got?
alternative.
Uh,
Many of my desires are things for which there is no alternative. And the Christian path has always been the path of renunciation of those desires.
Mm.
I just think this is a really significant pastoral thing.
As
What-
a pastor, I agree, but I think I would approach it differently, which is fair.
I'm just thinking about books. So
Spoken like a true PhD candidate. Expensive books.
a lot of books. So I haven't found any really great books for Christians that think carefully about AI. And this is one of the reasons why I'm writing the dissertation I'm writing, because we just need some better books for the church. But what you could do, and maybe Dr. Drake, you could think of some theology books, but you could give a simple book on AI, which you read at the same time as a book about what it is to be human, what it is to have desires, and read them in tandem with each other. So some books which I found very accessible could be good on AI, basic. A book by Melanie Mitchell called, I think it's called Artificial Intelligence, A Thinking Guide. That's just overall AI book. Ethan Mollick's
I recommend it too.
yeah, that's really good. Ethan Mollick's Co-Intelligence, if you want to think about ChatGPT. It was written pretty early on, so I wonder now if I reread it, if maybe some stuff could be updated. But if everybody wants to know about ChatGPT, that could be a good book, Co-Intelligence. Kate Crawford's The Atlas of AI, that book blew my mind. It's thinking about the impact of AI on human beings, power, the earth. I mean, asking a lot of questions about the material impact and human impact of AI. That would be really interesting to read in a book club, I think. Not a techie person, but there's a book called Filter World that talks about the recommender system. We haven't talked about that. I really wish we could talk about that. How things are being recommended to you all the time on Spotify, Netflix, things that you should buy, and the impact of that on the world. So there's some books, basic books that I think you guys could read with maybe a theology book in hand at the same time.
I'd also recommend the Futuring Hub. It's only just starting to disseminate, but the trend reports are there. Those are probably more for church leaders, but we've recently done church-facing workshops, the church and AI and the use of AI in the church and those kinds of things. And those, I don't know if they're on the website yet or not, but we're very church-facing, and so try to access it at that kind of basic level. The difficulty with, if anyone who's ever published knows, it takes like 3 years to get a book out. So by the time in this world, by the time you get a book out, the next thing's happened. So that one's tricky.
You also all kind of serve in these academic circles as well. How might we think about the best way to approach this with students, in knowing that none of us would have a semester to devote to thinking about this as we train ministers? But in 1 to 2 sessions, what do you think that looks like for an average professor who wants people to start thinking about this, particularly as we think about training ministers?
We just launch in and say everyone on the faculty should think about one way that they can use AI in their course in a good way. so that they're modeling it for the students. Because just to say, go and do this or go and do that is not as helpful, I think, as saying, here's a good way. We're now all going to do this together. This is a good way to use AI. And then have them evaluate it. You know, what was your experience like? And these are things we really do need to learn together. And then the faculty learns from each other too. But once one person tries something, someone else is going to try something else. And it's good. I think that gives the message that we're not afraid of AI, that we're willing to engage it, and that we expect the students to engage it. But I think if we want students to engage it, we really have to model it, which means we do have to spend some time thinking about the best uses of it and to think about that through that theological, ethical frame as we go.
That's great. Yeah. Anything else, guys?
So don't ban it. Don't ban it. Show how to use it wisely. I had the opportunity to teach a class in Australia on human and AI preaching. It was a blast, and I'm dying to teach it here. So this is my pitch to Truett.
Dean Still's listening.
So we started with a preaching conference where everybody had prompted ChatGPT to write sermons, and they got up and really preached them. I mean, whole body, everything preaching. No, you're preaching the AI sermon. And then we gave feedback to the AI sermons. What did ChatGPT do well? Could it do better? You know. And then every class, we talked about an element of what it is to be a human person who preaches. And then they went back to that sermon. Okay, now add in what's your life story. Now add in your creativity. Now, and then at the end, they all preached the sermons again. And we were weeping. I mean, it was so cool to see that process of moving from A to B, that I think that maybe there's a micro way that you could inject that into a preaching classroom without spending all that time on it. But man, it was a really fun process to go from the AI sermon to what we were calling our fully human preaching conference.
That's good.
I'll share a thought on this is coming from a conference on educators for AI. So think of all the AI people who teach AI. So we got together in this conference called EAAI. I forget what it stands for. It goes with triple AI, if anyone knows the AI conferences. So we get there, and they offer a recommendation because they're getting all these requests on how we're going to, from people in their universities, how do we teach AI to students? So this is regardless if this is seminary or engineering or church. If you're going to teach AI, the recommendation was that to teach it as a tool in a semester, as I suggested, in a course. Pick a course. They need to learn how to use it as a tool and have also a responsible AI or ethics session to go along with that. And that was the main consensus of the people who teach AI.
There's one more thing I would add, if I could, and that's that most professors see themselves as people who approach teaching as a pedagogy. I'm teaching you something, I'm giving you something you didn't have before. And I think AI pushes our teaching methods forward, even beyond andragogy, which is much more, the coach, to hudagogy, helping the students to discover for themselves rather than just, this mug jug, I'm filling you up and I'm telling you and I'm showing you, to say, I'm facilitating your discovery in the world you're going to have to inhabit. And so there's a real shift there potentially in pedagogy to andragogy to hudagogy. We talk a lot about this together as a faculty, and we realize that most courses have all three built in some way. If we're going to use Engage AI, then I think we have to have spaces where the students are simply facilitated in their discovery of how they can use it for themselves, and not just have us, tell them as if we're the sage on the stage.
Yeah, that's good.
And I alluded earlier to the loss of the hard work of learning. So spending time doing those things which are formative, but where you can have a shortcut through AI tools. So I think part of that, I was talking to Dr. Hayes before, language acquisition as an example of this. We also need to curate spaces where people are separated from those tools so that hard work can carry on. It's foolish for us to tell people you need to spend that time by yourself. people won't because it's just too tempting to shortcut. So we already have things like writing retreats. I think it really pushes us towards thinking about, especially in the context of seminary education, the embodied setting for that, and thinking about higher commitment forms of it where people actually spend time in the room. It is unrealistic to believe that somebody on their own in a room remotely won't use these tools. And therefore, the only way that it's likely to happen, that the necessary work of studying without them will take place, is going to be in communal settings, probably supervised communal settings.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So we've had several questions here, and they are all touching around the ethics theme. And so we're going to perhaps dive deep into some ethical thoughts here. And want to begin with this idea of how much bias in a system should disqualify it from use, particularly for the church. That if AI is demonstrating this amount of bias, racism, classism, any number of things there, is there a theological grounds to stop using it because of that bias?
I'll start before the real ethicists jump in on this one. One of the things we push for when we do responsible AI is to have transparency on these biases. And in the dream that we have when we develop standards for AI ethics is that in the same way that you have a label for food products that tells you this has so much sodium, you should only be consuming this much, this many portions of this because of what doctors say, that we have something like that with respect to AI products. So that you, as a consumer of these products, will know, okay, this has a bias towards or against certain communities, and it's this much. Or we train these models in this data, which is known to have poison or the same thing that you have in the label, so that the decision then is on you. You knowing this, would you still use this product? But I think we're not there yet for everything. But we're getting close. So I think that's a good start, but I don't have an answer to like how much bias might be good.
Yeah.
Something I keep wrestling with preaching is, does this AI generated sermon have more or less bias than Pastor Joe in rural Texas who's preaching about how he hates Catholics and women should be doing the ironing? You know, it's really hard to think about, because this is something I'm realizing in my dissertation. Homileticians have not been asking the kinds of questions we need to ask now with AI on board. And we haven't been asking a question like, what biases are really out there in the world in people's sermons? People aren't collecting that data in America. And so I don't have anything to measure this against. Like, are these biases I'm seeing here better or worse than what's in the church? Maybe it could be better, right? I don't know. So that's where it's hard for me to say, get rid of this. The other thing, because a lot of my writing I'm doing right now is in algorithms and in the history of algorithms, so going way back before computers. And in early mathematics, the dream of these algorithms, which form the foundation of these systems we have now, were to do things without bias. So to divide inheritance fairly, to create properties fairly, to be able to use these mathematical formulas to be able to do things in a just way. I think about this, the rule of three, and the way that helped people to be able to do fair trading with between currencies and things like that. And as I'm thinking about that in the history of math, I'm like, how do we get to this place? Maybe you know, Dr. Rivas, how do we get to this place now where these algorithmic systems are so full of bias? Is that large language models that are giving us that? Answer this question for my dissertation.
I have a hunch, but It starts that the data these companies have used is from the internet, and as I said before, the internet is full of great people, right? Now, and so it sort of highlights the society that is shown on the internet. So it is a reflection of who we are and not who we want to become.
I mean, AI is no different from anything else in that regard, right? As Christians, we don't have it right on everything else except from AI. I mean, I wonder if you know where your clothes were made and who made your clothes in the room today and my clothes. And do we think about the little hands and the conditions in which they were made? We probably don't. That's not an excuse then not to worry about biases. It's just to recognize that we have all kinds of unrecognized biases that are harmful environmentally and socially and humanly. And so my view of AI is that we're launching in and doing these experiments and so on, but as we go, we're thinking very carefully. If it ever reached a point where we felt our use of it was racist or unjust and so on, we would stop using it. There's no question in my mind that we would, because that's a higher commitment. The one that I really makes me cringe at the moment is the environmental impact, because that one is clear and we know it. I have some problems with that. We're continuing to think that through and wonder how far do we go before we say, well, let's not do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we lose the ethical conversation when we stop wrestling and when we stop thinking that it's my responsibility and we're not willing to put ourselves on that space and say, actually, this is me, my decisions. I'm impacting other people by the decisions I take about everything. But AI is just a whole new realm of that. It's not as if we could solve it in AI and then everything else would be solved too. But I hope that there are ways that we can make it less biased, by, I don't know, I was intrigued by your ASCII list earlier. And so I put it into our version of ChatGPT, and it said, that it was a really bad thing to try to do that. And then it said, but I can give you a really good list of theologians. And at the very top was James Cone. And I thought, all right, it's possible, but the people who are doing stuff that I don't understand would have to be much more involved probably in that. But yeah, I think we have to keep accepting the challenge and not feeling like we've ever got it right.
Yeah, that's good. Indeed. So, and again, these are variations of theme here, but it is another question to be probed at from a different angle, perhaps, is how do we affect or do better with the training data? If we know we're shoving this off on other brothers and sisters around the world, and it's very, detrimental to their well-being to do that. How do we affect change in that space? Or can we affect change? Do we just acknowledge it but don't have steps towards remedy? That's a big question. I realize that, but
I mean, I wouldn't mind having a go there. So, I mean, I think there's two answers. One is to address that question, but then another one is to try and pull back and think of a question behind the question if I can. So I would say places like Google and Microsoft are actually working very hard on the training data question. So at one of our workshops, we had somebody from Google DeepMind working on some systems dynamics approaches to generating synthetic data. So one problem you've got is if all the existing data comes from the internet, and it turns out this is possibly not what we wish humanity to be, but it is what humanity is, then we have to think about how can we encode what humanity ought to be in ways that then can feed into these systems. But there's also another way of thinking about this. And this is where I think the university and science and Christians have an opportunity here. There are other AI methods that are not based on machine learning. Now, machine learning has shown extraordinary results recently, but it has inherently built into it the inescapable encoding of things that are. An enormous amount of what's going on is trying to prevent you from seeing what's built into the system. But it's there in the background, and there's no trivial way around that. What if we could also, as Christians, take a lead in other ways of doing scientific work here that could lead to methods that don't have this problem built into it. And I think that it's very hard work. The reliable generation of new knowledge is a hard problem. And maybe we don't just have to buy into the fact that pragmatically machine learning methods have produced some really cool outcomes. We could think about other ways of doing the science that don't have this problem hard baked into it technically.
That's good.
So in other words, we should have more computer scientists
Yeah.
who are
Innovate.
Innovate.
Innovate's what I'm hearing.
There's a couple answers that to the question that I think are innovative, but the people are working on this. And I thought you should know in case they work out in the future. One of them is to have your identity or autonomy over the data that you produce as a human being, and keep track of that, whether it's on social media or your cell phone or places you visit online, having you decide on that and giving you as a human being the power to do that. So that requires tremendous effort from government organizations to make it happen. But in theory, we have the technology to track that today, because I was using in a proposal that I submitted a couple months ago to track down, and in case you opt out of your data being used to train any model, which is your right, we think, I would think you think the same way. If I opt out, then it is my responsibility as a creator of that AI model to go back and make sure that your data is no longer part of the model, and change the model so your data is not used there. So that is an extremely challenging problem that we're proposing to solve, but we're working on that. And the other thing is, I think it's regarding the augmentation. I think it's a very simple solution on looking at the distribution of data and create more of the data that we want that is aligned with societal values, and we call that a alignment of AI.
So can I ask a question off the bat? Because I was wondering this earlier. There's some scenarios going forward that AI will break off into several major camps sponsored by maybe different companies, and then they will have their own kind of ideological branding. How likely is that scenario? And if that happens, is there any alternative? I mean, as a future scenario, I think it's quite likely, not certain, but likely, just because there's money in it, right? So
yeah, I think fortunately that's the one that moves people nowadays. I don't know.
like my worry is that the church will be, the people from this kind of church will be in this camp, and the people from that kind of church will be in that camp. It just becomes another thing that divides us as the church. And I think that would be hugely unfortunate, but it looks more than possible.
Yeah, I don't have thoughts on that yet, but I'll think about that one. I think it's important.
And I get, my instinct is that you are quite right on this, and it's simply because of the scale of what's involved. So almost nobody can train a new model, a new foundation model. And, so there's a very small number of foundation models that exist. They are already highly politically and theologically coded in different ways, and that's an inescapable baked-in fact. So I kind of think we're already there. And this is one of the reasons why I think looking for other scientific and technical ways forward is so important in the long run, because a number of people have alluded to the fact that things change really quickly. At the moment, we're talking as if large language models are the only game in town. One of the great things that's happened is there's been the creation of this vast quantity of new compute power that at the moment is just used on large language models, but it could be used for other things too. And I think that's a possibility. We could be doing different new creative things as well as just accepting the givenness of a particular systemic thing. So I think we're kind of stuck, but also I feel like we could do other things.
I love the idea of the possibility of another desired future. I'm just so worried because we can already see, can't we, every day, the way that the algorithms are gathering people up into their confirmation bias groups. And there's entirely different realities being formed for people, entirely different realities. So it's It's not a hopeful future, that one. So, it's kind of scary.
So I just want to go back to this idea of accepting this reality that we're in while also having these other endeavors. I was thinking this morning, oh, isn't it weird that there's a Canadian, an Australian, and a New Zealander all on the same panel? And what is happening in the British colonies that we're all thinking about AI? And then I thought, sometimes being in a world of AI is a little bit like being in a system of colonization. That we have these powerful, wealthy forces that have created this world that we live in. And now part of what I'm trying to do is figure out, okay, how do I live in it? I can't create a new large language model, but I can figure out how to live in this world that that has been colonized. And I think of that because there are the same kind of negative forces at work that happen in colonization that is happening with AI. But we also have to live. So that's just like a kind of a framework that I've been thinking about lately. And maybe some people who are in that kind of world of study might be able to speak more to that. But I don't know. It's just a way I've been thinking about it.
Yeah, I think this next question dances around that as well. It's a little bit confessional, so they didn't sign their name, so that's good. But this question centers around so much of the reluctance with AI is about cynicism and how systems treat us as products. And Amazon, Walmart, etc. We are consumers who are tracked, and AI knows what we want to order before we order it, right? Yep. It's suggesting us dinner options, right? And so, and I'm mindful even of the Netflix documentary, was it last year, that was curated for me, that was on social media, and it had the line of, if you can't see the product, you are the product. How do we move past that? How do you push past that kind of cynicism that says, this is all for exploitation, even of me as I sit and pick things on Amazon? Can we move past that?
So my guide through theological life has been Reinhold Niebuhr, for good and for bad. And he always said that whatever humans give themselves to will always be marked by sin. And so I think that AI is another aspect of that. It's an amazing invention. It's phenomenal. It's mind-blowing. And as was just been said, it's the world we live in. And so we have to live in it. But we have to always acknowledge it's not our salvation. It's not going to be our master. It will always be marked by sin at every turn. And as for everything in life, we try to, ameliorate those harms as best we can. I don't think we do that by not engaging. I think we have to engage to understand what they might be, to be able to identify them, avoid them. But I mean, our world is full of that, and all the things that our world is full of will be magnified in AI. I think that's I get excited. Yay, AI, I know AI. It is the two sides of it, right? But that's the two sides of it, almost every aspect of human existence. Wherever there are polarizing forces or things that long to pull us apart or drag us down or undermine our humanity, they're going to be there. And so for me, it's recognizing all of that. AI is full of sin. It's marked by sin at every turn, but it's also a reality. And so my question is always, where is the kingdom of God at work here? And how can the kingdom of God be at work in more and better ways within it, while recognizing the sinful side won't be overcome, not this side of glory.
I think this interacts maybe as well with how we think theologically about finance, because the profit motive is wonderful. Financial competition in a marketplace is a wonderful signal, but it can also be corrupted, and there can be market failures. And theologically, a kind of market failure is the one that simply feeds my desires, because, as I argued before, our desires are disordered, and therefore one of the things I want to do is not just feed all my desires. This would be super bad. But left unconstrained, financial incentives are likely to align badly with the disordering of human desires. So I would say there would be interesting things for Christians to engage in that. So in the formation of people for involvement in financial markets. This is an area of Christian formation that we could attend to. For the regulation of financial markets, I mean, there's no truly unconstrained market, and as societies we've generally gone, there are bad outcomes when people who are involved in the financial industry are left to their own devices. Bad stuff happens to society. This is a new way of recognizing that unconstrained allocation of capital can produce bad outcomes. The really tricky thing is the pace of change in this is so fast that it's very hard to say precisely what we ought to attend to in that regulatory environment. So we want really thoughtful Christians who are sophisticated in their financial thinking to be involved in those conversations, I would argue. And those people exist.
Yeah.
And Christians historically have been good at forming networks of people to do this kind of work together. They've tended to be highly relational. So you can think back to previous things where Christians took a lead, like I would say the Clapham sect, Wilberforce and those others who gathered in a particular church in London. You know, there are models in Christian history about how we did this well. And there are also models in Christian history about how we did this really badly. And so I think we could reflect on those. Historians might have an interest in that.
Yeah, that's good.
If you're thinking about just what Walmart and Amazon and are recommending to you, then I would say it's not just about feeding your desires, but that system of recommendation is also trapping you. I know I'm sounding so negative about this right now, but I would say for me, the recommender system, worst algorithm. I'm going to rank it. So down. I'm trapping you in unrecommend. I'm trapping you in a cycle of your past desires and not letting you move forward into any kind of new space. So you can have desire that turns to something good, but the thing about the recommender system, I can't explain this quickly, but it's recommending you things based on your previous things that you have enjoyed, liked, purchased, and also what people like you have also enjoyed, watched, purchased. It's not ever creating those moments where suddenly you like something unlike anything you've liked before. It's just keeping you in that loop. And that loop, I think, as much as you can as a Christian, consider how you can break that. Because I think that the Holy Spirit actually breaks that in us. So for me, that means I don't listen to Spotify recommends. I know that seems crazy, but I don't listen to Spotify recommends. I don't listen to it's like daily DJ. I actually intentionally choose albums to listen to and just let myself follow my music interests myself. I don't watch the recommended shows on Netflix. I read The New Yorker, so snobby, and look at what they're recommending, right? I try to allow myself still to have those experiences where my desires can be shaped by outside forces rather than being sucked into this system that is created to keep me spending money, because Meta, Facebook exists because we buy junk on Facebook. Like, use ad blockers. Do not be buying that mushroom coffee or whatever it is that you're getting advertised. It's trash. You know it. So anyway, mud water, even the name. But maybe
We are not sponsored apparently by Facebook here. I just
anyway, I just feel like that particular system, yes, you're right. Whoever's saying, I feel like I'm this consumer, not only are you a consumer, you're being told what kind of consumer you need to be. And as much as you can, try to turn it off so that you can discover all by yourself what you like, what you enjoy, what you wish for.
Can I riff off that? but I'm just going to be a little bit more negative because if is that possible? No, I'm going to spread the joy to everything because I think that the curation of what comes to us is not only about our purchases. I think consumerism extends to our politics, extends to our news, it extends to our apprehension of truth. And I actually think we have very, very little control in an AI generated world about our choices. I think we have choices. So for example, I've got like 8 news apps on my phone. I know which ones are automatically programmed to show me what it thinks I want to see first. So I get the news that's curated for me, not some kind of, if ever any news outlet was ever objective. And even if I have to go into particular places, local places where I know people there and say, what's actually going on in your community? That's as close as I can get. But even then, I think we have to acknowledge that we are just about programmed as people. And it's more evident maybe when it comes to purchasing and so on, but that consumerist mentality, we are being consumed, and I think our whole apprehension of truth, our access to the world is all filtered through AI, and the biases go beyond sometimes what we think they are. And I know that sounds really paranoid, but there's been enough research to show that that it's true. So yeah.
For anyone in the technical side that is curious about knowing more, Bloom filters is the family of algorithms I described initially, the Netflix recommendations. But the ones that create a psychological profile and take it a step further are in a family of nudging algorithms, if you want to look that up.
Yeah. So I do want to perhaps end our conversation on a little bit more hopeful note, because I'm mindful of John 1, that the light shines in the darkness and the darkness doesn't overcome it. Might you have a parting word for us, an encouragement, each one of you, and maybe we'll just popcorn, but might you have something you would want to say, something you've left unsaid, something you'd want to send us as a parting encouragement? That's it. Yeah. I realize that I inflected that poorly. I get that. AI did not create this transcript.
I mean, I don't mind starting because I'm full of hope. I'm an optimistic person by nature because I believe not in humanity or in my own understanding, but in the power of God. And there's nowhere, again, I said this earlier, where God can't be. So there's nowhere where God is not. So that means that in this whole engagement, the kingdom of God is present, and we identify within it where the glimpses of God at work are, and we join forces and we say that's something that we can do to harness this in a particular direction that serves the kingdom of God, that allows the Holy Spirit to speak, because I think that's the only thing we have outside the closed box of cause and effect. The only thing we have is the Holy Spirit to speak, and God speaks through people and enables us to address the issues that we're facing, I think, with hope and with confidence that the church will continue in this world. It might look completely different from the church that we know and feel comfortable and home with, but it will still be there, and I would love to be part of it, and I think that means continuing to engage.
That's good.
I think I want to leave you with some thoughts on personal thoughts. I want you to know that there is people invested in responsible AI, that here the people we train at Baylor that know AI, that graduate with doctoral degrees, that are going to produce things in the next few years. They are trained with good ethical values, and we got your back. It's gonna get better, I promise. I promise you that. Yes, I'm on the record here. And I think it's important. It's so refreshing to see other people and meet other people who also care about these things. Gives me so much encouragement. And I think in the next future, I'm feeling very positive about it. I think you're going to see some changes. If not in the US, it'll come from other places like the European Union or other entities that are more advanced in contributing as a society to develop responsible AI. So I think I'm feeling pretty hopeful about this.
That's good.
I think my encouragement would be preaching isn't going to die. And the reason why I say that is because there have been times in the history of preaching where something very similar to ChatGPT sermons has happened. And I'm thinking specifically of times like during Charlemagne's empire, he created this book of sermons and said everyone has to just read these sermons. These sermons that were created by just shoving chunks of bits of sermons together. I mean, that to me sounds a lot like ChatGPT generated sermons. And people started to lose the ability to write sermons. And some homileticians talk about that as the death of preaching, the darkest time of preaching. But people kept becoming Christians. The church kept going on. And weird stuff happened during that time in preaching. People started preaching through theater and songs. Creative expressions of preaching emerged. There's something about our calling to share God's word that it's irresistible. And there's something about God's word going out where God grows that seed. And there's something about God's church where he just keeps growing it. So even while maybe things about preaching, this is in my land, might be shifting and changing and asking all of these questions, at the heart of it, the proclamation of the gospel and the receipt of the gospel, we've had times like this before in the history of preaching, and that stuff hasn't changed.
That's good. That's good.
I think I'd like to paint a hopeful picture really around aspects of AI that we haven't spent most of our time talking about. So again, most of us encounter large language models, but there's huge segments of AI that are completely different. And many of those are, in fact, places where Christians are leading the way. I'll use the example at Oxford. So Lord Lionel Tarasenko, who was the Dean of the Engineering faculty at Oxford, is now a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group and as part of his work in the House of Lords, has been enormously influential as an innovator in medical AI technologies. And in aspects of, there are a number of Christian faculty at Oxford who are deeply involved as, you know, international colleagues of you and others in creating new worlds. And I think that's probably the big thing I'd want to say here is large language models are one thing, but Christians have helped create some of the other aspects of AI that I would say are less problematic. And my hope is that over time, Christians will take a lead in creating the things that we have not yet even thought of. And that's what I would suggest that we pray towards, think together about, put energies towards, is where could Christians repeat some of the things that have happened in the past, where we take the lead in constructing a new world that builds towards the kingdom that we are, in God's kindness, sharing in the building of. And I think that would place us in a less reactive position and more of a constructive one. And I've hoped that we can be part of that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Can we thank them